Wizards of the Coast released a surprise ban announcement today, and it's a big one. We've got bannings, we've got suspensions, and we have a new concept with card rebalancing as well.
Magic. I am a wizard! History. I'm an old wizard! The magic historian. My bones hurt.
Greetings! Owners of fine luxury cardboard rectangles, my friends, I hope the day finds you well. We have gathered to discuss the new surprise ban announcement from Wizards of the Coast, and it is massive. We have a number of different subjects to cover. So you know what? I'm going to shrink down to a miniature version of me, and we're going to dive right in. All right, here I am, Tiny Mike down in the corner and ready to go, and we better get going because this article is quite meaty. There's a lot to talk about. First of all, we're going to dive into Standard, and this may surprise some people, but there are no changes for Standard. So let's take a look at their reasoning. It says, we've been carefully monitoring the Standard metagame since the format rotation and release of Innistrad Midnight Hunt. As Innistrad Midnight Hunt Standard season winds down and we approach the release of Innistrad Crimson Vow next month, we've been aware of some players' concerns about the impact of certain individual cards on metagame diversity, such as Allrun's Epiphany. All right, so you see this card, 2 blue and 5 for a sorcery, create 2/1/1 bird creatures and take an extra turn, and it foretells for 6. So this card made a big splash in the recent Worlds event, and also so did Essica's Chariot. 1 green and 3 for a 4/4 legendary vehicle. When it enters the battlefield, you make 2 green cat tokens that are 2/2, and whenever it attacks, you create a token that's a copy of a target token you already control with crew of 4. It is a surprisingly solid card. Both of them are, but after playing in the Worlds event, I can see, well, I mean, not playing in the World's like actual event, but the arena event, I can see that these decks that utilize these cards have a certain level of power, but don't ultimately feel like broken, busted, and completely meta-warping. So they continue by saying, after reviewing MTG Arena metagame data and recent online events, including the World Championship, and in considering the upcoming release of Innistrad Crimson Vow, we've decided not to make any changes at this time. And that's actually what I predicted. Someone asked me in a live stream, do I think that cards like Epiphany are going to be getting the boot? Is a ban coming soon? And I said, actually, I wasn't expecting them to make any changes. So this falls in line with my expectations. The article continues, we'll consider changes to the standard environment if necessary after evaluating Innistrad Crimson Vow's impact on the metagame. So next up is Historic. You can see Tybalt's Trickery is banned in Historic. If you're not familiar with Tybalt's Trickery, 1 red and 1 counter target spell. Choose 1, 2, or 3 at random. Its controller mills that many cards, then exile cards from the top of their library until they exile a non-land card. They may cast that card without paying its mana cost, and then they put the exiled cards on the bottom of the deck. So basically, this was originally concepted as a counter spell, but what it really, like a counter spell in a red style, where it's like, yo, I can counter your stuff, but you're gonna maybe get something in return, so it's got that chaotic red vibe. But what it really ended up being used for was combo decks, where you could just speedily get out insanely big spells by countering your own cheap spells, which definitely wasn't the intention of design behind this card. But I do love the artwork with Tybalt's outstretched hands here with these chains around. It's pretty dope. So Tybalt's Trickery is banned. Memory Lapse is suspended. Memory Lapse is a really, really old card. You have to go back to the beginning of Magic pretty much. It's from one of the most early sets. 1 blue and 1 instant, counter target spell. If that spell is countered this way, put it on top of its owner's library instead of into that player's graveyard. And the artwork on this card is absolutely amazing. Now, Memory Lapse itself isn't so much a problem card as the environment that it's in, and we'll get into the reasoning for that. And then Bainstorm, oh, it's made up of Bane. Brainstorm is banned in Historic from suspended. So this was originally suspended, and now it's officially being banned. All right, so Brainstorm, again, is a very old school card. 1 blue instant, draw 3 cards, and then put 2 cards from your hand on top of your library in any order. So it allows you to dig deeper into your deck. It allows you to set up cards on the top of your deck, it's a pretty versatile card. So it says, also, 5 digital-only cards are being rebalanced for Historic. Davriel's Withering and Davriel's Soul Broker's third ability now only affect target creature and opponent controls, and there'll be a bigger discussion of this further on in the article. Faceless Agent is now a 2/2 from a 2/1. Sarkhan Wanderer to Shiv's second ability is now +1 from +0, and Subversive Acolyte now costs 1 black and 1 from 2 black, is 2/3 from being a 2/2, and had the toughness increases from being a human or Phyrexian reduced by 1. We'll have actually visual versions of the cards on the screen after we go through the cards talking about the bannings and suspensions. All right, so this all comes into effect tomorrow, October the 14th. Now it says, Jumpstart Historic Horizons created a large amount of change in the Historic metagame, and most of it looks very positive. But after watching initial reception, September's Historic Arena Open, and the response of the broader metagame to the Arena Open, there are a couple of adjustments we feel the Historic format needs. In addition to the normal bans and suspensions, the digital-only cards in Jumpstart Historic Horizons give us a chance to return to a balance tool we haven't used in Magic for many years. Functional rebalancing for cards. So, we'll get into that a little further on. Bans and suspensions. On the broader Historic metagame front, one of the big changes is the return of decks built around Tybalt's Trickery, now using Throes of Chaos. So Throes of Chaos is 1 red and 3 for a sorcery that has Cascade, and Cascade says when you cast this spell, you exile cards from the top of your library until you hit a spell that costs less than Throes of Chaos. Then you can cast it without paying its casting cost. And this spell has Retrace, which means you can do it again, cast it again from your graveyard by discarding a land from your hand and paying its casting cost. So this is a pretty easy to use tool. So it says now using Throes of Chaos to boost the hit rate on the combo dramatically. This has led to a marked increase in win rates for the deck relative to the prior version and a corresponding increase in popularity. The prior, less consistent version of this deck was borderline, and the increased hit rate in this version has pushed it over the line. Because we think it's unlikely for Historic to be able to safely include a combo of this speed and consistency, Tybalt's Trickery is banned in Historic. So up until Throes of Chaos came into the mix, Tybalt's Trickery was right on the edge, where when it happened to you, it didn't feel good. But there was a lot of whiffs. There'd be a lot of swing and a miss. And as a result, you couldn't really rely on it to be too consistent. Throes of Chaos, obviously increasing the consistency, means that Tybalt's Trickery has to get the ban hammer. Next up, it says, in the banned and restricted announcements earlier this year, we've talked about the dominance of blue and red decks. Our past changes, along with the additions from Jumpstart Historic Horizons, have done good work in addressing this, but we still see a slight issue here. Looking at high-level play, and the Arena Open in particular, Memory Lapse emerged as nearly a must-include in high-performing blue decks. It was the most played non-land card in the Arena Open, as well as the best of 3 ladder, and it is one of the most played cards in best of 1 as well. While we do believe that removing Memory Lapse from the format is likely to create further improvements in format diversity, we also believe the case is less clear than Tybalt's Trickery. As such, and in order to increase format diversity, Memory Lapse is suspended in Historic. It will most likely ultimately get moved to being fully banned, in my opinion. Historic doesn't have the same bevy of insane counterspells that physical Magic does, and so Memory Lapse isn't exactly a hard counter in terms of the fact that they will be getting the spell back, but it does stop it for 1 turn and make it their next card draw, which is pretty potent and clearly is enough to make a big impact on Historic, right? So it makes sense to me. If you see everybody playing with this, it's kind of warping things. You give it a suspension and see what happens to the meta, but I ultimately expect it to get fully banned. Rounding out the bans and suspensions, Brainstorm is currently suspended in Historic, and this has helped in shifting the metagame in a healthier direction. Because the suspension has proved positive, Brainstorm is banned in Historic. I expect to see the exact same statement with Memory Lapse shoved in there going forward. So rebalanced cards, this is where it gets really interesting and crazy to me, because it has a number of implications. So In addition to these bans and suspensions, we are also rebalancing 5 cards with this announcement. Digital-only cards in digital-only formats like Historic give us the ability to functionally rebalance cards simply and clearly. We can simply update the text digitally, and the cards will remain accurate to their new function. Functional rebalancing is a significant change in how we're managing balance for our formats, and it merits a bit of explanation around what it does and doesn't mean. Going forwards, we're going to be managing formats on Magic Arena in 2 different ways. Print formats like Standard will continue to work exactly like they do in Tabletop Magic. For live formats like Historic, we're adding live balancing alongside banning and suspension as a tool to address problems and make improvements to the format. Now, this is very interesting because they're not talking about Historic-only cards. They're talking about the Historic format overall. So let's continue and we'll get a little more into that. We're very aware that there are many Magic Arena players who want the game to be an authentic representation of tabletop Magic, and our print formats will remain exactly that. Here, a card will always work the same way that the printed version of the card does, and balance will be maintained the same way it traditionally has been, through banning cards when they prove to be problematic. In addition to being an authentic version of Tabletop Magic, Arena is also a digital game. Digital games often make use of a wider array of balancing tools, like live rebalancing, and for good reason. The increased play rates and data collection possible in digital games tends to magnify the impact of power imbalances, which makes it valuable to have more tools to restore balance. That is true. Honestly, with the internet and the way that Arena works, it's very easy for everybody to kind of narrowly focus in on particular decks, and things that would be a problem are exacerbated by the fact that it's easy to share the information. Monkey see, monkey do, everybody starts doing it. And like it says, they can collect up a bunch of data and see where the problems are very easily. Because the truth is, Magic players tend to complain a lot. We all do it to one degree or another. And it's difficult to tell what gripes are genuinely logical and make sense and ones that are just kind of personal feelings. So it's like, I feel this way, the player base at large must. So having all this information gives you definitive info that you can act upon, right? So that's the idea. Now, currently, we're restricting these changes to digital-only cards, where there will be no conflict between a digital and printed version of a card. We would like to expand beyond this. For example, by rebalancing previously banned cards so they can be safely returned to play in digital formats only. There are multiple clarity and communication problems we will need to solve before we can consider these type of changes. This is something we plan to work on in the coming months, and since it bears repeating, would only affect digital formats. If you're not fully picking up what they're talking about here, they're literally talking about taking cards that got banned and bringing them back in rechanged format, rebalanced format, but these would be physical cards that exist in the physical world, like Uro, Oko, stuff like that, that were too strong, ended up getting like just banned, right? So now they would rechange those cards. So it's literally the same as the physical Magic card in terms of name and everything like that, but the way the card works would be functionally different. So you could have Oko Crown of Thieves in Standard, and I mean, this is just an example, in like a Standard format, and he works exactly like he would in Standard. But in the Historic format, all of a sudden his abilities are changed. Either they do different things or they have a number rebalancing. So it is a pretty crazy concept, the idea of taking cards that exist in physical Magic and making the digital versions of them functionally different. But as they say, there are a number of things they need to sort out before they can make that a reality. But it's a pretty wild concept to me. So one of the big themes of Magic over the last several years has been recognizing and embracing the many ways that Magic is played. On the tabletop side, we've released new content focused on modern players, commander players, collectors, and other groups. On Arena, we recognize we have traditional Magic fans and fans of digital games. With this shift, we aim to fully support both, continuing to deliver an authentic tabletop experience in formats like Standard, and embracing new balancing tools for digital-only formats like Historic. Now, how will rebalanced cards work? Since these digital-only cards are only on Arena, we can cleanly update all existing cards at once. With Arena's update on October 14th, the text and stats on these cards will change to match their new values exactly as if there had been an Oracle update. These changes will affect any format where these cards can be played: Historic, Historic Brawl, Direct Challenge, etc. There will not be an in-game notification about the rebalancing, but that is something that we're working towards. So a bunch of people are probably going to be abruptly surprised by this, right? Much like bans and suspensions, whenever we rebalance cards, we want to provide context around why we're making those changes. And now we have introduction to the actual changes themselves. So I'm going to skip the introduction part. Like digital-only designs, live balancing is a new tool to maximize the potential of our digital formats. This first set of changes is not meant to significantly impact the metagame, but improve the ladder experience. This will also give us a chance to collect feedback and data on how the environment reacts to these changes. While we will still ban and suspend cards, we'll also look for opportunities to improve the competitive metagame and address other issues through live balancing. The 3 buffs are aimed at popular cards that have room to be stronger to better serve the decks and roles they were designed for. The remaining 2 balance changes are not meant to reduce the playability of the cards, but to address an undesirable combo from Historic. So some of these cards are being made stronger, some of these cards are being made weaker. So first of all, we have Davriel's Withering. So this is the old version. 1 black instant, target creature perpetually gets -1/-2. The new version is target creature and opponent controls perpetually gets -1/-2. So the change is now it has to target an opponent's creature, which in one way makes it functionally weaker. This is a weakening of the card. And actually, Davriel's Soul Broker has the same kind of changes going on. The focus, Davriel is 2 black and 2 for a 4 loyalty planeswalker, +1 until your next turn. Whenever an opponent attacks you and or planeswalkers you control, they discard a card. If they can't, they sack a creature. -2, accept one of Davriel's offers, then accept one of his conditions. The game will randomly generate offers and conditions, which is really cool. And -3, target creature perpetually gets -3/-3. So the only change on him is the final ability that says target creature and opponent controls perpetually gets -3/-3. Now the reason for that change is, or those changes, is because it created undesirable interactions with Vesperlark. Now this is a card that was added into Arena with the Modern Horizons 2 Jumpstart set. So Vesperlark is 1 white and 2 for a 2/1 flyer. When it leaves the battlefield, return target creature card with power 1 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. And it has Evoke as well. So the deal with this is essentially you can just evoke the card. It will come out into play because how Evoke works is you cast the creature spell, but then you immediately sacrifice it. So you cast the Vesperlark, you sacrifice it, but you want to have already used, or actually no, sorry, you don't want to evoke it because you want to use one of these abilities on it. So you cast it regularly first, and then you give it a perpetual -2 or -3 to its toughness using either of those abilities. Now perpetually means that for the rest of the game, these stat changes persist. So if you were to use the -3/-3 ability of Davriel on the Vesperlark, all of a sudden it's a -1/-2 creature for the rest of the game. So you make it into a -1/-2, it goes to the graveyard, its ability triggers, and it says return target creature with power 1 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Well, Vesperlark meets those conditions because no matter where it goes, back to your hand, graveyard, or anything like that, it's now a -1/-2. So you put it right back into play, and then it immediately dies because the game's rules say, yo, that creature has negative toughness, put it in the graveyard, right? So as a result, you can essentially create an endless loop where the person who controls this can just do it over and over and over and over and over and over and over because it's not a May ability on the Vesperlark. So they have to choose this and they have to keep doing it again and again and again and again unless there happens to be another creature in the graveyard that they could pick to like break the loop or whatever. So people can get cheesy with this and put you into a draw lock. All right, so let's take a look at the improvements that they've made here. First is Faceless Agent. So the original Faceless Agent is 3 colorless for a 2/1 changeling creature. When it enters the battlefield, seek a creature of the most prevalent creature type in your library. Very interesting ability. So if you're playing a deck that has more goats in it than anything else, when you put out Faceless Agent, Seeking is a tutor style ability where it will look through your deck for a creature of the particular type. So whatever creature type you have most of in your deck, this card is going to randomly give you one of those creatures in your hand. And what's cool about Seek is because it's done randomly without you having to look, and you don't have to reveal it to your opponent. That's sweet, man. All right, then we've got the updated version of it, and what they did was they just rebalanced it by adding an extra toughness. So this version's a 2/2 instead of a 2/1. It says Faceless Agent is an important card for tribal decks that don't currently have the density of cards legal and historic to fill out their curve. This is a simple buff to improve the experience of players using those tribal decks. And that seems pretty straightforward. I have no problems with this change. The boosting of creatures' power and stuff like that, the cards' powers, seems to be pretty good across the board here. So next up, we've got Sarkhan Wanderer to Shiv. So Sarkhan Wanderer to Shiv originally was 1 red and 3 for a 4 loyalty planeswalker, +1, dragon cards in your hand perpetually gain this spell cost 1 less to cast, and you may pay X rather than the spell's mana cost, where X is its mana value. So essentially, you can cast dragons for less and for colorless, or with any mana, really. And then the second ability is 0, conjure a card named Shivan Dragon into your hand. That creates a card, a Shivan Dragon card, in your hand. The conjure ability is neat. And -2, Sarkhan Wanderer to Shiv deals 3 damage to target creature. So the change comes to his second ability here, where they upped it by 1. They basically changed it to increase Sarkhan's loyalty by 1 when you're conjuring a Shivan. And having tried Sarkhan, I understand this, because the whole like Shivan Dragon conjuring thing isn't that big a deal, honestly. It feels more impressive until you see it in action. So, Sarkhan's second ability is weaker than the other two, especially considering the tension between choosing to conjure a Shivan Dragon versus the ability to fuel future -2 abilities. We're aiming to better balance and reduce the tension between the abilities. That makes sense. It's like you want a Shivan Dragon in your hand, but at the same time, you want to be beefing Sarkhan's loyalty up because you can literally use him to just fire lightning bolts off. So that rebalancing makes sense. And then we have Subversive Acolyte, which had its casting cost and power and toughness is changed. So the original version was 2 black for a 2/2 human, 2 colorless or 2 generic, pay 2 life, choose 1, activate only once. Subversive Acolyte becomes a human cleric, it gets +1/+2 and gains lifelink, or it becomes a Phyrexian, it gets +3/+3 and gains trample, and whenever this creature is dealt damage, sacrifice that many permanents. This is a pretty cool concept. This is like a Phyrexian sleeper agent where he can either become a cleric or he can literally become a Phyrexian negator. So the updated version changes the casting cost from 2 black to 1 black and 1. The activated ability stays the same in terms of the cost, but the pluses and everything like that change because if you'll notice, the creature now says 2/3 down in the bottom right-hand corner. So while it says when it becomes a human cleric, it gets +1/+1, and when it becomes a Phyrexian, it gets +3/+2, it is actually maintaining the same stats as the original version, just beefing it up to begin with. So it says, Subversive Acolyte competes too directly with Gifted Aetherborn for black decks looking for defensive options, and changing its mana cost adds a defensive option for black decks without needing to commit heavily into black to play Gifted Aetherborn. Adding a toughness lets Subversive Acolyte better fill that defensive role early in the game, and we adjusted the ability stat boost to preserve the Phyrexian Negator reference. So that works for me. Honestly, the rebalancing that they've done here across the board, I think those are great choices. The choices of cards that they've banned for historic work and the suspension, that makes sense to me. Maybe not coming down on Alrund's Epiphany or Essica's Chariot might turn out to be a mistake, but ultimately to me right now feels like they're at an okay level on that cusp of getting into insanity. So that wraps it all up. Let me know your thoughts, my friends, and a big thank you to all my patrons for supporting my channel. It does mean a lot. I will see you all next time, my friend. In the meantime, if you haven't heard, Wizards of the Coast is having product problems with Crimson Vow, so that video is on the screen now. Go check it out.